So we've considered the arguments about modernity and postmodernity, and we've thought about Lyotard, Baudrillard, and other people's views about where we are in terms of a modern society or whether we're in a postmodern society. We also started to criticise these ideas. We talked about unexplained power and inequality, how postmodernists believe that we're all equal and everyone's view is equal in terms of relativism. However, people like Marxists have highlighted the fact that there are still inequalities between men and women, between people of different ethnic heritages, and that continues, and postmodernists haven't really explained that, whereas if we were in modernity, it would explain why that still existed. The idea that we have the freedom and ability to construct our own ideas are still restricted by poverty, again highlighted by Marxists, supported in essence by functionalists who believe that inequalities are important, that are linked to, which will inevitably link to people's socio-economic status, and postmodernists haven't considered this. So again, the idea could be argued that we're still in a state of modernity. Audiences are not passive, so postmodernists believe the idea that we don't really understand the difference between fiction and reality. We can't make that distinction. People living in hyper-reality are unaware of that fact that it's actually not reality, and through things like social media interact and believe that that's real. However, people are not passive. They can determine the difference between fiction and reality, and that's evident in our everyday interactions. Human rights violations being justified by the idea that all knowledge is true. So again, if we take relativism and the idea that postmodernists believe that all views are equal, if we believe that, then we believe that in things like discrimination, in racial hatred, in inequalities, because if individuals believe that, then arguably their view is right and valid. Also, the idea of the pessimistic view of the Enlightenment. So during modernity, where we see the advancement of scientific rationality, it's been argued that the scientific usefulness has come to an end. However, Harvey would say that we're closer to the truth than ever before. So postmodernists believe that that there's no true science, there's no true foundation, so anti-foundationalism, there's no true explanation or understanding of society. However, in criticism of this, Harvey says that we're actually closer to the truth than ever before. If we keep developing science, if we keep improving technologies, then we will understand the meanings behind them and make them even better for the consumers and the people that are affected by them. So an alternative argument is that of late modernity. So rather than saying we're either modern or postmodern, there's actually the argument that suggests that we're in a later form of modernity, or early postmodernity, depending on the perception of the person that's speaking. So in terms of late modernity, Beck argues that we live in a risk society, which is where we have a systematic way of dealing with hazards. So part of modern society highlights that the technological changes have caused hazards and risks that we face. But because we live in a later form of that modernity, we've developed strategies and ways of dealing with those problems, and therefore we manage risk effectively. And that is categorised as a part of late modernity. We've also got Giddens, this is Tony Blair's right-hand man, who says that we're in a state of high modernity, much like the idea of late modernity, but how we see society as being actually at the end of modernity, where we've developed a really important and progressive contemporary society that's actually quite radical in its means. And then Jameson and Harvey, who take this from a Marxist perspective, who say we have developed in terms of our society, yet we're still capitalists. However, we live in a postmodern capitalist state as we are today, in that we've changed into a time of late capitalism, where early capitalism is defined by the Industrial Revolution, mechanisation, and so on, as a result of the Enlightenment. Now, we've developed this in our capitalist state and have become in a state of late capitalism. So some information on this just to develop. Beck talked about the technological rationalisation, scientific revolution in progressive and developmental technologies, which in which we do manage risk. There are greater risks that we face, however we manage them, and that can be, you could think about the internet and about how we use firewalls and virus protection to try and manage that risk that we face in modern society as it stands today. The more progression we make, the more risk we're in. So therefore we put things in place to make sure that we manage the social structure and the difficulties that we face as a result of this progressive modernism. Giddens, again, to elaborate on that, talks of high modernity. One of the sociologists who spells postmodernity with a hyphen talks about how we actually haven't abandoned modernity. We're still part of modernity, but there are elements that show that we've progressed from the days of early modernity, and how where we see progress, it's not actually a new era, it's just development of the existing one. He also talks about the way that we follow transitions and cultural developments through early modernity into high modernity. High, I guess, links to the idea that it's progressive, it's better than it was before in status. So we've now embed diversity within our society, yet it's still not postmodern. We still don't have the choices that postmodernists believe that we experience, and so therefore we're still in this state of high modernity, better and progressive modernity as it will be. And then Jameson and Harvey, to elaborate on this, talk about how we see political economic change which does influence the capitalist state that we have. Whilst we still have an unequal society, there are structures in place which manage that, and certainly that does change over time and space. One of my students did argue actually about how it's all well and good to argue that we're in a postmodern moving into a modern society. However, actually that can only be argued in certain spaces. So across space you could argue that some places aren't even modern. Thank you, Jessie. So we have this idea of late capitalism, where we see evidence that we're still living in an unequal society, a society that has a foundation of the economy, and without the economy, without money, the superstructure wouldn't function. Without the superstructure, we wouldn't have money. So we're still seeing this same model, except it has developed and there are other things that influence this too.